Wow, it's been a busy week. American tragedy after American tragedy, and it's only Thursday. Oddly enough, it's the anniversary of the tragedy of 9/11. Though by the time this goes up, it may very well be days later. I'm just getting caught up on all the things and compartmentalizing them as I witness them. The one I wanted to talk about first, though, was Decarlos Brown Jr. and Irina Zarutska. R.I.P. to Miss Zarutska. Condolences to her loved ones. There's a lot going on here, most of which I do not want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the politicization of this death, as evidenced by DOJ's insertion of themselves into what is clearly a state issue with no federal implications other than the crime occurred in a Democratic city, led by Vi Lyles, the first black female mayor of said city, and this administration seems to be on a mission to take over these specific locales. I don't want to talk about the victim's sanctioned immigration status as a refugee fleeing Russia's active war against Ukraine, given this country's climate with regard to immigrants, the suspension of the U.S. refugee admissions program back in January, though not retroactive, and this administration's handling of the war between Russia and Ukraine. I don't even want to talk about DeCarlos Brown's legal defense fund being removed by the GoFundMe from its platform. What I do want to talk about is the chronic and persistent failure of see something, say something, not the actual nationwide campaign trademarked by New York MTA after 9/11 and used by Department of Homeland Security, but the actual practice of seeing something and saying something and then doing something. An ordinary commute on a light rail train in Charlotte, North Carolina was turned into chaos by DeCarlos Brown Jr.'s fatal stabbing of Irina Zarutska. This is not just another tragedy. It's a case study in America's constant and persistent failure to see something and actually do something. Because let's be honest, people did see. They saw for decades. They saw this man with schizophrenia, delusions, a rap sheet longer than a CVS receipt, and said and did nothing. Nothing but put him in jail, of course. A man who has been involved with the criminal justice system of courts, cops, and doctors for years. And yet, here we are. This was not random. This was preventable. But prevention is not something America does well, especially when it comes to serious and persistent mental illness. Those include schizophrenia, bipolar, and major depression. Brown did not come out of nowhere. His story reads like a case study in systemic neglect. Arrested multiple times and diagnosed with schizophrenia. He reportedly told officers on one occasion that he wanted them to investigate a man-made material that was inside his body, inside his brain, that was controlling him. Officers allegedly advised Brown that that issue was a medical issue and there was nothing they could do. He became upset naturally with their lack of response and called 911 to speak to someone else. They saw, they said, and they did nothing. And weeks after the attack on the light rail, that's when a judge ordered a mental health evaluation. That never happened. So you see something, you say something, and then we're still left with failure. But why? Someone told me a long time ago that when the question is why, the answer is always money. And I thought about that. Because here's an uncomfortable truth. Prevention does not pay. But is that why nobody bothered to intervene? Real prevention means things like supportive housing, case managers, crisis intervention teams, long-term therapy, actual follow-up when a judge orders an evaluation. All of that is expensive up front. And it doesn't generate headlines or profit margins. But you know what does make money? Incarceration, prison contracts, endless prescriptions doled out behind bars. Politicians score cheap points with tough on crime speeches. So instead of paying for case managers, we pay for prison guards. Instead of funding stability, we fund surveillance. Instead of preventing collapse, we wait for the collapse to happen and then throw people in a cage. America does not have a mental health system. It has a criminal justice system that pretends to be a mental health system after somebody gets hurt. And this didn't happen out of nowhere. It was designed this way. You see, once upon a time in America, back in like the 60s and 70s, the United States started to close its state-run psychiatric hospitals. And this process was called deinstitutionalization. And the promise was that patients would no longer be warehoused in massive, often abusive institutions, but instead, they'd live among their own communities, supported by local mental health clinics and outpatient care. That sounds amazing. That sounds like a utopia. Freedom, dignity, modern medicine, all working together? Except there was one itty bitty teeny tiny problem. The money. The money never followed. Community clinics were never funded at the scale they were needed. So people were released with nowhere to go, with no services, no safety net, no treatment, no stable housing, no case managers, no medication management. So you know what happened next? Police, they stepped in as the first responders, and courts became caseworkers, and prisons became the new asylum. So roundabout by the 80s, we're not talking about deinstitutionalization anymore. We're talking about mass incarceration, with people suffering from serious persistent mental illnesses filling up prison cells instead of hospital beds because there's no more psychiatric hospital beds for them to occupy. So we did not end institutions. We just swapped out the white coats for the orange jumpsuits. Which brings us back to Decarlos Brown Jr. He isn't just one man who snapped. He is the predictable outcome of decades of disinvestment, neglect, and denial. He was failed by every institution that touched him. And in failing him, we failed his latest victim. Courts ordered help. The help never arrived. Mental health care was promised, and then it was denied. Prevention was possible, but it was ignored. And then when tragedy struck, the system snapped into action, not to heal, not to treat, but to prosecute, to punish, and to lock away. In a healthy society, seeing warning signs trigger care. In our society, it triggers paperwork that just gets lost in the shuffle until someone dies. We don't have a system of mental health care. We have a system of damage control. We don't save lives. We monetize their collapse. And for people with serious mental illness, the so-called cure ends up being incarceration. You're in a cage with a prescription slip. So unless something changes, unless something else different takes place, the next one is already on its way. Welcome to the asylum.